Okay, now we want to really look at muscle cell depolarization, and to do that we really need to look at the generation of an action potential in the first place. Generally that starts with discussions about nervous tissue or neuron physiology. This YouTube video, there's the URL and I will stick it on the thing for you, shows a diagram, 4 minutes long by the way, shows a diagram of a plasma membrane. What we have is sodium ions at high concentrations outside the cell in the interstitial fluid. This part below at the bottom of this diagram, it represents the inside of the cell across the plasma membrane. And in this case, we have higher concentrations of potassium inside and low concentrations of sodium. The net result is there's more positively charged ions at higher concentrations outside of the cell than inside of the cell. Relatively, this is positive and this is positive, but this is more positive, therefore this is negative. It's not really negative, it's just less positive. And that's why I say this is not an electric current, not at all. This is a depolarization where we're going to reverse the situation when there is an irritation to this nerve or there is a proper chemical setup at the plasma membrane of a muscle cell, the sarcolemma. So what happens is, at a point, gates open because of the stimulation of the nerve or the muscle cell to allow sodium ions to rush in. Is it active transport? No, it is not. It's passive, it's diffusion, because there's a high concentration gradient with a high concentration outside, a low concentration inside, and so these ions that are at higher densities outside rush in to equalize the situation between both sides of that membrane. But then ATP is used to pump through the sodium-potassium pump to pump those excess ions back out. And that's called repolarization. When they rush in, it is called depolarization. And what actually happens in that rush is that the inside becomes more positive than the outside. And so technically in a lot of diagrams we'll see the plus outside, the negative inside, and then a reversal of that. And then that chemical reaction at that point on the cell membrane makes the next point susceptible, and then a sodium channel opens there, the process starts over. So the wave propagates in one direction, down the membrane, down the axon membrane if it's a nerve cell, or across the muscle cell membrane, the sarcolemma, if it's a sarcomere, i.e. a muscle cell. As the repolarization is happening using ATP to pump this stuff back out of the inside of the cell, as it's happening behind the initiation of a new depolarization point, then the wave of depolarization travels in one direction. Think of it as like the wave they do in a football stadium where everybody does this, a wave, and it goes like a wave around the stadium. It's a wave of depolarization. It is not an electric current. But so often, and almost completely, all the time, the textbooks represent that as an electric current. So when that gets down to the end of a neuron, what happens? Well, let's look at this diagram. So here's the end of the neuron. We got a bunch of vesicles here, and this is the neuromuscular junction. So we have a neuron on one side, and the muscle down here, and the gap between is called the neuromuscular junction. And at the end of all nerves are synaptic vesicles that have neurohormones in them. In the case of a neuromuscular junction, this hormone in these vesicles, or the chemical that's in these vesicles, is acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is the chemical that is then released when the action potential gets to the end of this neuron. It's released, travels across the synaptic cleft, and stimulates an action potential to start on the muscle cell. There's a drug called succinylcholine chloride, which is an antagonist. It blocks the action of acetylcholine, effectively paralyzing an animal or part of an animal. When that is injected into the bloodstream at low levels, the whole body can become paralyzed, including the breathing mechanisms. So we used to use this as a capture drug. When used properly, an animal will go down fast, but it was considered to be cruel because the animal knows what's happening but is paralyzed. It cannot breathe. And if we don't get to it with an antidote fast enough, or if it doesn't wear off fast enough, the animal would die of suffocation. But it is used in human medicine in an aqueous solution to paralyze the throat so that a person can be intubated for medical purposes. Think of somebody shoving a breathing tube or some kind of tube down your throat or a stomach tube. What's going to happen? And especially like if it's a baby. The gag response is going to be phenomenal, and a person would not only gag but could be hurt by the process. So what is done is, very simply, administer succinylcholine chloride to paralyze the muscles in the region temporarily so that a tube can be inserted. Okay, so remember, in the sliding filament theory, if we're looking at a striated skeletal muscle, we have actin and myosin fibers that overlap, and what happens is that when calcium rushes in, these fibers can slide across each other, and the overlap between the actin and myosin is the dark bands that is seen in tissue slides or histology slides of skeletal muscle tissue. Okay, the last thing we want to talk about is how muscles react to stress and how they get their energy. There are three types of energy systems associated with muscle respiration. Remember that in terms of oxygen use and in terms of energy use, your skeletal muscles use more in total than all the other parts of your body put together. It's your major source of oxygen burning, and most of the exercise that you do requires aerobic respiration, which is also known as the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, and that happens on the cristae of the mitochondria in a process called the electron transport system, and what we end up with is production of extra ATP. So we use that energy in aerobic respiration when we're breathing oxygen. Now let's suppose that we can't get enough oxygen for the exercise we're expending. In that case, we start using an anaerobic pathway. Anaerobic meaning without oxygen, anaerobic glycolysis. And when we do that, we produce lactic acid. And when that builds up to a high enough level, our muscles burn and burn and burn. And we finally just have to stop. It's like poison. We have to stop. And we do have to stop and get that lactic acid out of our system. The other system is the creatine phosphate system. This video, again, the link is here and I'll put it on the web page when I post this. This video talks about the creatine phosphate system, and you have 10 seconds worth in your muscles, in which case if you sprint for the first 10 seconds, you can do it without oxygen. And in fact, Usain Bolt, who runs the 100-yard dash in less than 10 seconds, actually doesn't burn any oxygen. He's using creatine phosphate. And this video talks about that, and it also talks about the lactic acid. This video does not talk about the Krebs cycle or glycolysis, but this is a very interesting video relative to exercise and anaerobic exercise. Another side product of long-term anaerobic respiration, you know, if you get on a treadmill and walk and walk and walk till you're sweating like crazy, is ketones, and you can taste those in your breath, in your mouth, because it comes out of your breath. It's one of the waste products. Okay, so that's that. Now let's talk about building muscle. How do we build muscle? Well, remember, here's the muscle cells. When we exercise, we can get muscle tone. Muscle tone is really a constant contraction of muscles in a group. Some muscles always contracting. And we improve that through exercise. That helps to improve the use of sugar in our body to hold down the diabetes problem. It increases blood flow, causes increase in blood flow to those muscles that are being used heavily, and is altogether a healthy thing. When we put stress on a muscle by doing isometric exercises or lifting heavy weights, we are causing that muscle to increase in size, not in number of cells, but each cell increases in size. There's an increase in vascularization or blood flow, more efficient use of oxygen. The heart will increase its filling. Heart rates may slow down given enough practice and exercise so that there's a greater volume of blood being pumped at each step. But in the beginning, we simply breathe faster and our heart pumps harder to get more blood moving. But anyway, the cells increase in size. That means they will increase through mitosis, not their number, but their number of nuclei, and their number of mitochondria to provide the energy will increase. Connective tissue associated with the muscle bundle will increase, and so you'll get that bulge that shows, like in the vastus lateralis, the stomach muscles. You'll get that bulge that shows the six-pack. You'll lose that fat so you can see that six-pack. If you flex your biceps, you'll have a bigger bicep and a bigger bulge. You'll have bigger shoulders, you know, depending upon the physical activity that you do. And that's how muscles grow. If you don't use a muscle, they atrophy. So if a muscle is in a cast, like with the bone, it will atrophy and become flaccid. Lack of exercise causes muscles to degenerate. So they can waste away if there is non-use. So it gives a lot of meaning to the phrase, use it or lose it. It's a real deal when it comes to muscles. Thank you.